All right, so now that we've converted our server over to use MongoDB, there's one thing that I want to show you how to do, and that is split up this server file into multiple files. Now, this is something we haven't seen how to do yet, at least as far as I can remember, and it's a really important thing to do because already our server file is getting a little bit lengthy and a little bit hard to find what we're looking for, right? It's not too bad at this point, but it could be better. So essentially what we want to be able to do here is have each of our routes inside its own file instead of all of the routes inside the server.js file. Now this is a little bit tricky because the way that Express works is we have to call app.get or app.post or app.put or app.delete on the server that we created. And in order to make sure that this all happens when the server actually starts up, there's a little bit of a hurdle to get over with that. Now, obviously, one way to do this would be just to import the app, our Express app into other files and add the routes to them there, right? So if we had another file, we would say something like import app from server.js, right? I'll just blah, blah, blah right there. And then we would say app.get with, whatever our route arguments would be inside of there. Now, this would work, but it's not really my favorite way of doing it for a variety of reasons. The main reason is that when we do it like this, we have to remember to actually import this file into whatever file we're running initially, right? So we would need to have like an index.js file that actually imported all of the files that did this. We would need to have a server file that actually exported this app thing there, and we would need to have files here for all of our routes. And we would need to make sure that the index one imports all of these, and each of these would have to import the server file here. Now that's not really that bad of a thing, but I'm going to show you a different way to do it that I like doing a lot better for several reasons, which we'll see later. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to basically define all of the routes for our application in their own files, of course, as objects. Now that might sound a little confusing, so let me show you what I mean. First of all, let's create a new folder inside our source folder here, and we'll call that folder, routes. And inside this routes folder, we're going to create one file for each route that we want on our server. Okay, so we're going to have one for getting all notes, right, which we'll call list notes route.js. We'll have one for creating notes, which we'll call create note route.js. We're going to create another one for updating notes, which we'll call update note route.js. And we'll have another one for deleting notes, which will be delete note route.js. Okay, now what each of these is going to look like, as I said, it's going to just be an object, so we can say something like export const list notes route. And this object is going to be a sort of configuration object for the route that it represents. Now, because we're designing this ourselves, we can really add in whatever properties we want to this object. But what I'm going to do just for starters is we're going to say path as one of the properties, and that will be what we would normally pass to the first argument of Express. Okay, so we could say path / notes for our list notes route. And the second property is going to be a method route, which will just be the method, right? Post, get, put, delete, that we're using for this route. So for listing our notes, that would be get. And the last property that we're going to define for now is going to be a handler property. And that's just going to be, basically the function that we would have passed as the callback function to our routes. So we'll say handler async request response. And that will contain all of the logic that we normally put inside this route, inside our server. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it in there. Now, one thing to notice here is that this notes.db isn't accessible to us inside here, and we can't really import it because it's inside this async function. Okay, now we'll take a look at a few different ways to fix that later on, but first I want to show you how we would actually add a route like this to our server, right? In other words, once we've expressed all of our routes like this one here as objects, how do we add them to our Express server? And, just to show you how this would work, I'm just going to say response.json for now, and we'll just send back something like this. We'll say message, it works. Okay? This will just be for testing purposes. But anyway, back in our server, what this is going to look like is we're going to import our routes by saying import list notes route from its file. And then instead of just calling app.get, app.post, app.blah, blah, blah in each of these, what we're going to do, I'm just going to comment this one out for now. What we're going to do is we're going to say app, and then we're going to say list notes route.method. Okay, so that will be app.get, app.post, app.put, and then we're going to call that with the path. Okay, so we can say list notes route.path, and the handler, so we can say list notes route.handler. Okay, and that will do basically the exact same thing as we saw here, except now we've defined our route inside another file. Now this might seem a little silly to do it this way, and it might seem like there's a lot more typing that we have to do, but what I usually like to do, and this usually makes it much easier to set up and maintain a server in my experience, is from this routes folder, or wherever you have all of your routes defined as objects, we just create an index.js file, which exports all of those routes as an array. Okay, so this might say something like export const routes equals, and that's going to be an array there. And inside of here, we're going to import our list notes route. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. List notes route from list notes route. Just fix those quotation marks there. And we'll add that list notes route to this array. So what that lets you do, now that we have this in an array, is we can actually import all of the routes of our application in one fell swoop by saying import routes from routes. And then we can just loop through them and do this exact kind of thing that we did here with our list notes route, but with all of the routes in our application. So in other words, adding all those routes to our server simply looks like saying routes.forEach. And for each route, all we do is say app, route.method, route.path, route.handler. All right, and this single statement that we have here will take care of adding every route that we exported from this index.js file here to our server. So essentially what that allows us to do is define all of our routes inside of here as objects, just like we did with list notes route, and export them from index.js, and that allows us to remove them all from our server.js file. So just to show you that this does work, first of all, what I'm going to do is delete this notes array since we don't need that anymore. We're using MongoDB now. But just to show you that this works, I'm going to send a request to our list notes route, which we defined. Okay. And we should see that we get back this message it works thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to restart this and run our app again with npm run dev inside our notes app directory. Oops, and it's going to open up the front end, which isn't going to work right now because we're not actually returning the notes as we were before. What I'm going to do, though, is open up a new tab and go to localhost 8080/notes, which is the route that we defined as an object just now, and we should see that it says message it works. Cool, so what we're going to do is we're going to basically rewrite all of our routes to use this kind of format instead of adding them inside our server.js file. Right, this will allow us to split up our server routes quite a bit more than we would be able to do otherwise. But before we do that, we're going to need to take a look at how to allow our routes to get access to this NotesDB thing. And that's something that we'll take a look at shortly. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.